Hey, hello everybody out there. Welcome to the kickoff of eScrap Virtual. This is the 2020 edition of the eScrap Conference and Trade Show, and it's very different than the normal situation where we're all gathered together for a couple days in a hotel, usually in Orlando or New Orleans. Yeah, we're responding to the realities of the pandemic. We have some great discussions scheduled for the next couple of months, and then a trade show and networking opportunities at the end of October online. And we're kicking it off with opening day here and a really exciting panel discussion called Forging a Path Forward. And we're going to be getting into that in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of give some details on eScrap Virtual. For those who don't know me, my name is Dan Leif. I am the managing editor of eScrap News and Resource Recycling, which puts on the eScrap Conference and Trade Show each year. And I just want to welcome you and thanks so much for joining us here and hopefully throughout the fall. So a few sponsors I want to recognize that are with us throughout eScrap Virtual over the next couple of months. Our gold level sponsors, C2 Management, Environmental Reclaim, Glencore, USAE, and the R2 standard from Siri. Some really great companies and organizations that have been with us for a long time, and we're so happy to have them on board here in 2020. And some silver level sponsors. Want to thank these organizations and companies for also being with us and for their really helpful support this year and in years past as well. So thank you to our silver level sponsors. A few quick tips as for using the software that we're using for today's discussion. There's a chat over on the right side that you can use to communicate with other attendees. And then if you'd like to have bring your own voice into our conversation, there's going to be plenty of room for that today. Please use the Q&A tab, which is separate from the chat. You can go ahead and write your questions in there. Those will come into the back end, and then we'll be moving those over to the publish section. And from there, you can actually upvote and help decide which ones might be the best ones to bring into the conversation, and then I'll be going from there from the publish side and asking questions of our panelists. So please use the Q&A section for your questions and look forward to those. And as I mentioned, eScrap Virtual is happening throughout the fall, starting today with the kickoff opening day panel discussion that we have here, and then through October, we have some really interesting industry interviews that are lined up, and then everything again, as I said, culminating at the end of October. Today's session is free, and then for the rest of the content, you'll need to be a full registered attendee of eScrap Virtual, and you can do that at eScrapConference.com. And yeah, some more details on what we have on tap for the rest of the fall. We're really excited. We're getting some more programming hammered out, but you can see the full lineup of speakers that we do have confirmed and other events over at eScrapConference.com. And with that, let's get into today's discussion. Basically, our idea was to lead things off with a real open conversation with a variety of different stakeholders about how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected electronics recycling and ITAD in a number of different ways. And so joining us today, we'll just go down through this quickly. We have Rod McDaniel. He runs S3 Recycling Solutions in the Nashville area. That's a company that's been growing fast of late. 2018 moved into a 75,000 square foot facility down there in Nashville, and we're excited to hear kind of how things have been affected through Rod. So thank you for being here, Rod McDaniel. Then we also have Tracy Phillips, another processor voice. She runs a company called Natural Evolution in Tulsa, Oklahoma. that's been around since 2003, and they recently moved into a larger facility, also a 40,000 square foot facility with a variety of operations and growing customer list. So thank you for being with us, Tracy Phillips. And then to get kind of a state program voice into the conversation, we have Jessica Miller. She helps run the electronics recycling program for the state of Illinois. She's been part of Illinois' EPA's waste reduction and compliance team for some time now, and has a variety of environmental services experiences at the state and local government level. So Illinois, one of about 25 U.S. states that have legislated e-scrap collection and processing programs. And for those of you that have been in the industry for a while, you know that that's a pretty important mechanism for moving material into the system, and a lot to be discussed there. And along similar lines, we have Jason Linnell. He's the executive director of the National Center for Electronics Recycling. And that organization plays an active role in both the Oregon and Vermont state e-scrap programs, but then also does a lot of research and analysis of legislated efforts and electronics recycling issues as a whole across the country. And Jason is certainly an expert in that field. It will be really interesting to see what his, I think, views or insights are regarding how COVID-19 is affecting our business today. So with that, I'd like to just get into the discussion here and start maybe with a couple questions for Rod and Tracy. Again, you're processing companies, leaders of processing companies, and for each of you, maybe just from a macro sense, what are the biggest operational changes you've seen or had to make when it comes to your processing companies, you know, over the last 6 months as we've dealt with this pandemic? And maybe we can start with you, Rod.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Obviously, this is a different environment. So some of the things that we're doing, it seems just odd, but one of the things that we immediately did was actually hire a security officer. And so that security officer maintained guidelines and restrictions when it comes to COVID. So all of our employees get screened. Any visitors are screened. They're making sure we're staying in compliance when it comes to wearing a mask, making sure that the employees are staying socially distanced. So that was one of the things we've done. So that's a full-time officer staying 10 hours a day on site. One of the other things we did, and this was kind of immediate, was that we had our entire administrative staff work from home. So there's only two of us, myself and our director of operations, that are in our office space. Everyone else, business development, marketing, CFO, all our administrative staff were working home 100%. And honestly, I don't know if that'll change. I mean, things have gone well. So I'd say the other thing we've done that is a little different is that we immediately contacted our cleaning crew and implemented a three-day deep clean of the office space, cleaning knobs, forklifts, keyboards, mice, everything that our employees touch. It gets deep cleaned 3 times a week. So those are some of the operational changes that we've made. Obviously, it incurred some costs, but has ensured the safety and security of our employees.
Great. Yeah, sounds like some real quick steps and some major changes that you made quickly. So great to hear that it's working out for you so far. Tracy, how about you? I know that you are now kind of personally affected in your day-to-day by the pandemic, and yeah, let us know the details on that.
Sure. So at the very beginning, we initiated certainly social distancing. We've got a fair amount of space, so we were able to comply with that pretty easily. We shut down our offices at the end of March to April. And so it was basically just us, if you will, and then open back up in May, I think May 4th, to the public. But we've kept nobody, actually, even very few vendors even are coming into our facility at all. And we're not really going out that much unless we can, if we're picking up off a dock, or, we have very little contact with people. As far as internal operations, we certainly have implemented masks, changing gloves. We're setting equipment for 72 hours, when it comes in before we actually touch it. And then doing deep cleaning as well. We're doing a lot of that ourselves, just in rotation. So we've, as far as like the daily knobs and light switches and forklifts and tools and all that kind of stuff. And so we've, everybody's kind of taken their own ownership of that. And we've put a lot of, stations in place, and materials in place where we can accomplish that. But it's, to Rod's point, it's definitely has increased our days and the cost, for all of that. I mean, we're absorbing it, but it's definitely, when you're keeping people spaced out, it takes longer to get things done. Communicating in masks is kind of a challenge. So, trying to work through a lot of those things, but, and we've put in, some, we've done some other stuff to the public, but as far as operations and functioning internally, we have a pretty skeleton staff already in the office. And so we have enough space that, we could, still maintain a good social distance without being on top of each other. So, right now, everybody's still coming to work. So,
Great.
Yeah.
And then your own personal experience, you are at your house right now.
I am. Yeah, I am. So I was notified by my tribe's health department on Saturday that we had a potential exposure, and so I was asked to quarantine actually until Saturday, and so. I've had to get tested, and but still, even after a negative test result, you still have to stay in quarantine. So I've been doing that, working remotely, and we've had 2 cases already since March where people have quarantined throughout this process, and so everybody's been paid while they've been in quarantine, but. We had one person quarantined twice. So, that it adds pressure, to everybody else when those people are gone, and you have to work around that, and just but we're managing, but it's different for sure.
So
very, do that, so.
Yeah, illustrative example of just the complexity that is running an electronics recycling facility right now, and trying to deal with workforce and your own person.
Yeah,
it's great to hear you did test negative, and
it did.
And the industry is staying as safe as they possibly can right now. So thank you for that.
It is. There's a lot of unknowns in the lack of testing, and the time frame of that sort of adds to the burden, I think, as a company and business in order to deal with that. But we're doing the best we can.
Jessica, let's move to you. Looking at the statewide program in Illinois, how have things changed? I know Illinois itself was going through a bit of a transition. There had been some new legislation that moved through over the past 2 years and was in the process of being implemented. To have greater financial coverage of drop-off sites in particular, and so there was some moving parts already, and now the pandemic. What have your general reactions been to adjusting to the current reality?
Sure. So like you noted, we are now under the Consumer Electronics Recycling Act. That technically our first year, and that was 2019. So we've been under 1 year of that, and now we have 2020, which, as we all know, has impacted e-waste, especially for our program. And we did have a lot. The springtime, so when the pandemic really hit here, that is when events would have started, in the spring, through the summer and the fall. And from what we've seen is there's been a lot of canceled events or postponed events. I would say almost all of them. So events have been impacted and will continue to be impacted for likely the rest of the year. Some of the sites that are going have started to reopen a couple months ago. The sites reopened, and I think there was lots of material coming in. I do know a few instances where they needed additional pickups because they were getting quite a bit of material in. And just overall, I think there's been some frustration for citizens trying to, maybe they are cleaning out their home or trying to get rid of electronics currently, and they're trying to do the right thing, but they may not have an event or a site accessible to them at this time. And that's just the reality of, dealing with a pandemic right now, is that they may have to hold on to this material for a little bit until they can either have access to a site or not. But I will say sites have reopened and are starting to reopen, and that they are getting a good flow of material from my understanding.
Great. Jason, is that something that you're seeing nationally as you've done your analysis or talked to state program leaders? Is there that sense of, or has there been a sense of maybe residents not being able to move material into the system all that easily, and or what other big trends are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think that what I'm seeing is consistent with what Jessica is saying there, that in the first few months of the shutdowns in March and April, lingering into June, we had just a lot of programs that stopped collecting. There were a number of municipal programs that stopped collecting. Some big retailer and nonprofit collections stopped during that time. And we're starting to see that shake out through the data that we have gotten back in. And as Jessica noted, events especially were particularly impacted because just any events that was scheduled, in the spring months, they were shut down, they were canceled, with the plans of hoping to be able to do that later in the year. We're starting to see them slowly be scheduled again. I know in our Vermont program, we've had events happen in the summer months. Some events are happening across the country and other states as well. And slowly but surely, a lot of the collection sites, permanent collection sites, have started to take material back in, but there are some challenges. There are staffing challenges at the collection sites as well as at the recyclers, trying to get the staffing to the levels that they need to take the volume in that they were getting in last year at this time. But overall, we have seen a drop in the volume through the second quarter for the three programs that we're active in, which one of them is the Illinois program where we manage the manufacturer clearinghouse. We saw there through the second quarter compared to the second quarter last year, we saw a 30% drop in the volume that was being reported. In the Oregon program is around 20%. Also in the Vermont program, around 20 to 25% drop compared year to year from 2019 to 2020 through the second quarter. So the levels are getting back up now, back to where we would expect them to be in the summer months. And in some cases, as Jessica mentioned, there are some places that have gotten in more volume than they can handle as they're ramping back up, and they're getting people coming in at the level they thought they could go in previously. So that has been some challenges there, led to some challenges there. But slowly but surely, those sites are coming back online, as well as some of the retailer and the nonprofit programs. But there are some challenges in getting things back to where we would expect them to be over the summer months.
Yeah, and you mentioned retailer closing. I know, one example is that Best Buy, which is an important collector in a lot of different regions, that they did suspend collections, and I believe that is a policy that's still in place. So certainly, just again, trouble is getting material into the infrastructure that we have. And I guess that notion of dropping volumes, that kind of leads into a question that we had from the audience here, from my colleague Colin Staub, actually. And I'll put this to Tracy and Rod. Jason mentioned in the Illinois program, year-to-year volume drops in that collection of about 30% down. I'm wondering, in your two processing facilities, is that about on par for what you've seen? Are you seeing volume drops, or what has the trend been in terms of material coming in your doors? Maybe we can start with you, Tracy.
Sure. We have seen a drop overall of about 8%, but I would say between June and July, we've definitely seen an increase, and so we've seen a flood. I mean, there was definitely a pent-up demand, and because we shut down in April, and one of our collection sites that we work with at least locally in the Tulsa area, they quit taking things in as well, and there was a pretty large rush, and so we've quickly been coming back up in volume in our municipality drop-offs. So I would say some of our corporates and some of our larger customers, just because people aren't working there, there's still a lag in that. But as far as residential, we're getting close to back where we were.
Rod, how about you?
Yeah, so in April and May, we saw a huge decrease of about 50%. It was pretty bad. But then June, July, and August have been huge, and we don't really do drop-offs or public collection. All of our stuff is corporate, and we've actually seen in June, July, and August about 180% increase.
Wow.
Yeah, we currently have 46 open lots, and those are pickups, and that's not typical.
An open lot meaning, so those are pickups that you have not been able to service yet?
No, those are pickups that have been serviced but are in the warehouse that haven't gone through the process completely.
Right. Does that cause challenges when it comes to trying to staff? I know with huge fluctuations in material, and I think a lot of companies tried to cut down on staff earlier on in the pandemic, but now you have to be ready for a surge and, like you said, a surplus. So how have you managed with that?
Well, those are conversations that we're continuing to have and work through. It's a conversation that we had last night. We've implemented overtime for the employees. So instead of just one shift, last week we've implemented 2 shifts, and they can work overtime. So that has helped. It's odd that it's pretty hard to find people right now. Finding help right now is difficult, at least in the Nashville market. So we're just trying to utilize our current employees. They already know the process. You don't have to, retrain anyone, and everybody likes more coins, so extra coins. So they've stepped up, and it's decreased those open lots because it was much higher.
Right. Jessica, I wanted to ask you a little bit about when it comes to the collection events that have been able to reopen. What are you hearing or seeing when it comes to making sure that that safety is being safety protocols are being followed as material is being collected, and it's a human to human interaction that happens in collection events, and what are you seeing as best practices in that realm?
Sure. So I did write down some things because I wanted to make sure I covered them. But so obviously, like proper PPE for people that are staffing these sites or events, a lot of contactless handling. So maybe the people that are staffing are getting the items from the trunk or something like that. Limiting the number of residents allowed on site at one time and making sure those residents are masked and that they're properly social distancing. And then I know a lot of people in our state, you can charge for TVs and computer monitors. And so making sure that that is a cashless interaction. So basically making sure that the payments for these are done online and in advance so that you're not having to exchange money. And then just making sure that high contact areas are disinfected properly. And that is mainly what I would say for sites and events are important in what is being implemented right now. And then I did want to go back really quick because some of the things that Jason was bringing up reminded me of some other points, is that I will say that the Illinois model is unique in that while we do track how much weight we collect for e-waste, we don't necessarily have goals anymore. So we don't have manufacturers scrambling and trying to figure out how to get their weight for the rest of the year. And then, yeah, the issue with events is just figuring out how to run an event during this time in accordance with health guidelines. And it's probably going to depend county on county, because if you have high COVID cases, you're probably not going to want to, attempt any event. And then finally, I will say that I think it is disappointing, obviously across the board, but especially for SERA being a new law, we rely on, data to see how this program is going. And so SERA will sunset at some point, but we want to make sure we have good data. Obviously, we can't get much information from just one collection year. And so this is going to impact the trend and the data that we're going to collect in seeing how successful this program is. But hopefully in 2021, it won't be as affected as much, and it'll just be a dip in the data.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that folks across recycling are trying to grapple with right now, is how to make sense of the numbers that we're seeing and work them into future planning and what to disregard and what not to. It's an interesting trend. We have another question from the audience I'd like to bring in, which is basically how many e-scrap companies have closed because of what we've seen. We've seen a lot that have temporarily shuttered or reduced staff significantly. But maybe I'll go to you, Jason, with this one, since you do look at the industry more as a whole. And I don't know, I don't expect you to have an actual number on how many processors have closed, but what's your general take on that when it comes to, who's been able to do business and who hasn't?
It's an interesting question, because I can't think of any off the top of my head that I have heard of that have closed, but that the ones that I'm more familiar with would be the ones that are operating within that the state programs, the municipal type programs that are servicing state manufacturers and those working under state laws. I haven't heard of any that have shut down completely, either bankruptcy or otherwise, but it's still, I guess you could say it's maybe relatively early in the process, and we'll see how the industry, how things go towards the end of the year. If certain companies were able to weather the storm of the shutdowns early in April, May, June, and are able to come out ahead, those will be the ones that survive going forward. But we could see still some lingering impacts towards the end of the year, especially as some of the assistance that was available early on in forms of the small business loans and other things that were available at the federal and maybe at the state level run out. That could have an impact on who is open and closed later on in the year.
Yeah. Is it anybody else have thoughts or impressions in terms of that aspect of companies having to close or not close? Clearly, Natural Evolution and S3 Recycling have not closed and are with us here today. So.
It's well said by Jason. I echo everything he said. So awesome job.
Yeah. I don't have a good viewpoint at this point. I would say it's probably still early.
And at E-Scrap News, you know, that we are regularly, or in the past, when we've heard of companies close, that's something that we do report on. And certainly my take has been that the industry lost a whole lot more companies due to the CRT issue than COVID. But again, we're still early on.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the residential side, you know, material coming in out of homes. But I wanted to shift a little bit to the commercial side of things. And increasingly, you know, electronics recyclers have focused on serving clients that run offices or data centers and other commercial type material generators. And we've seen such a shift when it comes to working from home and the way technology is deployed. There was a huge spike in the value of used laptops as companies were trying to supply those workers that now needed to work remotely. And so I'm kind of thinking, Tracy and Rod, when it comes to that, servicing the corporate sector, what are the biggest things that you've seen, both in terms of challenges and opportunities over the last several months and moving forward? And let's start with Tracy.
I'm not sure I think some of our companies have been hanging on to stuff, and then some of them, just because of lack of staffing, have been a little bit slower in where they may be more consistent in their turnover. We're seeing more delay. So it's just taking a little bit longer to get things out the door. And as far as pricing of things, you know, it's been on the resale side has been more consistent. You know, that's been pretty steady, but I'm not sure that, you know, I can pinpoint one thing. I think there's a few industries that have been a little bit affected more than others, but I don't see nothing's glaring in our numbers. How's that? You know, there's an overall kind of slow in a couple of sectors, but again, I think it's just more of staffing, of working slower, less people in certain shifts, and so things are taking longer to get done.
Rod, how have you seen things unfold when it comes to commercial material, which, as you mentioned, that's really the primary focus of S3?
Yeah, so, you know, we have about 161 corporate clients on our roster, and so far through the year, only about 75 of them have actually been active. I consider active actually they've initiated a pickup, or we've gone and picked up that equipment. What I have seen is two things. The medical hospitals, they have been getting rid of a lot of equipment. And I read an article on one of our customers where this is their best profit year so far this year. And I'm assuming in healthcare, they're doing pretty well. So I've seen a lot of equipment come out of our healthcare clients. I mean, typically, you know, you're doing a bi-weekly pickup with, you know, a large healthcare client. We're starting to see twice a week. And we're also seeing an uptick in data center equipment that's coming out. And it's mainly still focused on healthcare, but healthcare is about the majority of our clientele. It's probably 50% of our clients.
Mm-hmm. And what have you been seeing when it comes to pricing of refurbished material or parts, you know, kind of moving back into the remarketing sector? What does values and demand look like?
So I've seen server memory it's been an uptick in the price of server memory. Obviously, everyone has seen where refurb laptops are a big hit right now because of the OEMs not being able to produce as much as they have in the past. But I'd say those are kind of the two areas. We've seen also a big demand for mobile devices to use as hotspots, not necessarily as a actual phone, but more as a hotspot. So we've seen that.
Makes a lot of sense. Gonna kind of stay in the processor realm here with a question from the audience. What has had a highest impact to your business? Higher revenues from greater prices for IT assets and an overall lift in commodity prices that we've seen in some metals of late, or lower volumes from a slow commercial activity and just a general sluggish economy. So I guess the question is, as a whole, Tracy and Rod, have you seen a business boost because of pricing and realities in the market, or a business slowdown because of just less activity happening in the commercial sector? Rod, we'll go to you with that.
I'm going to try to answer it because I'm not totally sure I understand, but I'm going to attempt. I mean, I'm going to speak from a remarketing standpoint. I mean, yes, we've seen where we generate our revenues on the back end of reselling equipment, and so we've seen laptops and stuff come through and getting more money for those devices. And so, yeah, our revenues have grown because of that. I mean, we've seen 20-30% increase on our laptops, laptop devices.
Tracy, how would you attempt to answer the question? I guess generally,
Yeah.
the realities of the commercial market, has that been a good thing or a bad thing overall business-wise for Natural Evolution?
I think at some level it's washing out. I mean, a little bit, because there is some increase in revenue that we've seen on the resale side for devices, but on the flip side, there's been increase in costs and some slowdown of certain sectors of volume, and so at the end of the day, it's overall, our business hasn't, we're steady. And so it's kind of, that's what I mean by it's kind of a wash. While there is the increase, it's not like it's increased so much that it's increased our profitability, because we've had to incur costs, in operations and then seen some changes, in the inbound side that's all that's done is sort of helped compensate for those costs and those, hopefully, perceived temporary declines in some volumes. So, yeah, it's kind of a wash.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'd like to move things back to the state program experts. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit specifically about budgeting, program budgeting. I think one of the large effects that we're seeing from the pandemic is, budget shortfalls at the government level, particularly state and local. Every state, I believe, is required to have a balanced budget. They can't run into large deficits like we can at the federal level. So something like a state eScrap program, obviously, it gets funding from OEMs and outside sources in most cases, but still, what kind of large scale impacts might we expect due to budget shortfalls at the state and local level? And now we'll start with you, Jason, on this one.
Yeah, sure. There definitely are impacts. There will be more impacts as the year goes along and we get into states setting their budgets for the next fiscal year, and they have to make decisions about what they can and can't do. I mean, for these programs, as you mentioned, they are mainly funded by the manufacturers. So they're not relying on a state budget to hand out grants or to contract with recyclers. It's going through the manufacturers are paying under the state law programs. And they are sometimes that goes through the state. In a couple of instances, there's state programs. And we are working under a couple of those. But in other instances, it's just the manufacturers contracting directly with group plans or with recyclers themselves. So to that extent, the programs could be impacted if the manufacturers themselves are impacted, whether it's from changes in the market, shifts in the types of products that are being sold, or shifts in the overall marketplace itself that would lead to some manufacturers going out of business, which does happen continually. There's always manufacturers coming in and out of the market, and that impacts the state programs because they have to go then find those manufacturers and make sure they're registering and paying for their recycling obligations that they have under the state laws. So that will continue to be a challenge. But we could see some impacts from state budgets when it comes time to the staffing levels of the state agency that's overseeing these programs, whether or not they have the resources to go out and do all the enforcement that's necessary to track down those manufacturers, to have the oversight over the collection sites and the recyclers under their programs. So hopefully, some of those are also funded by manufacturer fees. There's registration fees and administrative fees that manufacturers pay to the state in addition to paying for the recycling costs for whatever they're required to under the program. So in theory, those should be not as impacted as, say, any other type of budgets that does not have a dedicated manufacturer-supported fund, but we could see impacts for that. And there could be ancillary impacts as well in terms of what the state agencies can do for their oversight, their outreach, and anything else they would plan to do.
Jessica, how do budget realities look in Illinois for the program, and what impacts could you see moving forward from a pandemic-related budget shortfall?
Sure. So I think it's very likely that the state is going to be struggling with funding to some degree, and other state agencies will as well. But I will say that the Illinois EPA is unique in that we actually generate most of our money from things like tipping fees and other fees that we put on maybe the waste industry or other generators like that. So the fund that we have is the solid waste fund, and I will say that is doing okay given the circumstances that's going on. At the state level, we are currently looking into doing a grants program for e-waste that counties could help get some money to run collection events or sites. I don't have any specifics on that, and that has really been put on halt. Those talks have been put on halt for some type of grants program due to the pandemic. But I will say on the flip side, and what Jason has noted, is what could likely affect the e-waste would be local government budgets. And so that is really going to differ probably from county to county, because counties that have landfills can get things like tipping fees that help them run these extra activities such as e-waste programs. So they could be insulated to some degree as opposed to other counties that aren't generating any source of income. And the costs for these counties, like Jason had mentioned, manufacturers cover most of this, but for counties, they may have to incur labor costs, and they can charge for computers and, computer monitors and televisions to help cover some of those collection costs. But a lot of counties don't want to do that. They don't want to impose any type of collection fee on their residents. So that is another cost they could incur. Is just not having, if they don't want to charge a fee, they're not having that money to set off, any budget shortfalls.
Right. Yeah, it's something we see so often in recycling that ultimately it's a local it's a local project or challenge where all of the specifics of each individual community really play into how things work or don't work. And interesting to hear that manifest itself here as well, not surprisingly. Jessica, I'd like to keep it with you. A question from the audience, talking specifically about material streams, and as the pandemic took hold and as moved forward and sites have closed and reopened, has the material stream changed at all? Maybe from previous years or over the last several months, more computers or mobile devices or CRTs. How has the material stream changed at all, and has that affected program economics?
Honestly, I can't speak too much to that, as we collect most of this data at the end of the year, and that's when I'll be able to compare it to the 2019 data. I'm not sure if Jason, Rod, or Tracy have any sense of how the waste stream is changing. But as far as, I haven't heard anything specific from counties that, hey, I'm receiving more of X, Y, and Z. But hopefully at the end of the year, or it would be beginning of 2021 when we would get the 2020 data, we can kind of look and see if and how that stream has changed.
Jason, are you hearing anything on that front? Again, I know most of the data is an annual thing, but anything anecdotally you're seeing or hearing?
Yeah, I did look at that a little bit. For Illinois, it's interesting. It's pretty consistent from all of 2019 through the first 2 quarters of 2020. The mix of the product types, and Illinois has got a pretty expansive list of product types that are covered by the state law. We do have a pretty good breakdown of that. It does seem to be tracking pretty closely to what it was in the last year. I have heard anecdotally that computers and laptops and under the state programs, under municipal programs especially, have never come in high volumes at all, and they're even more getting a little bit more scarce now, because if people are holding on to their laptops, not wanting to turn them into those types of programs, maybe because they're not able to get the newer or even refurbished ones that they want to get, that could lead to fewer of them showing up in these programs as well. I looked at some of the Oregon data we're getting into, and it does seem to be we're getting slightly more televisions than we have in the past. That had been trending downwards as the total weight of TVs comes down, as DRTs become less and less of an overall portion of the waste stream. But they're not huge impact, not dramatic changes in the mix of product types coming in.
Great. We've talked a lot about what some of the on-the-ground impacts, changes have been to collection and processing. I kind of want to shift now and maybe look forward to what we can expect. And this is a question for everybody. And what steps can individual stakeholders and the industry as a whole take, now and in the coming months to try to ensure that the electronics recovery reuse sector can stay resilient and move through this time period as strongly as possible? So yeah, what can we as an industry do to help ourselves right now in the months ahead? And let's start with you, Tracy.
So for us, I think, continue to stick to our principles and operate in transparency and really develop our relationships with our vendors and our customers. I think is really critical during this time period. It always has been, but when difficult times show up, having those relationships and having the principles that you operate under seems really important. And I know our customers, we get that feedback as to how they appreciate, one, how we've responded and handled this particular event and the steps that we've taken to ensure their safety and ours, and just to continue to operate that way. And so I think transparency and communication is a big key.
Jason, what do you think? Kind of industry steps that individual companies or organizations can take to keep things resilient?
Yeah, I'd echo what Tracy said about transparency, sharing information and data and best practices as we go forward, so that others can learn what is working, what seems to be some of the roadblocks, since everyone's facing some similar challenges in terms of getting the programs back to where they were initially, and then seeing them continue and build on them going forward. So we need to know, what's coming back. What are some of the best practices you can do at the collection level? What are some of the best practices that recyclers are doing or having success with, so that we can all try to manage through this time? And maybe there's some practices that will continue going forward, even once we are in a post-pandemic period, whenever that will be, so that we can have those practices in place. So I think there's a lot of things that we can learn if we're sharing information like that.
Jessica, what are your thoughts on steps to resiliency?
Sure. So looking at it from the state level, I will say that my division was kind of uniquely positioned to be able to work through this pandemic well. A lot of what we already do, we're well adapted to remote contact. You know, people like Jason's in another state. A lot of my contacts in the recycling industry are in other states. We interact with solid waste coordinators throughout the whole county. And so the biggest part, just as Tracy had said, is communication. So making sure that we have open communication between the recyclers, Jason, the counties, the group plans. I think that makes everybody feel a sense of security and knowing that, you know, we can all talk and communicate with each other and get issues resolved quickly. And also we do have electronic reporting. So most of what we're getting from counties would be in some type of electronic format. And then as far as resiliency in, you know, having electronic sites and events is just, you know, making sure that you have well adapted policies and procedures in place that you're routinely following. And that reflects, you know, the current circumstances that are going on.
Thank you. Rod, we'll hear from you on this as well. What are your thoughts?
I think it's important to take advantage of a pandemic. I know we're in the middle of it. There's a lot of things, there's some uncertainty, but I think some things that are certain. If you are lacking equipment, this is a time to better your process. Get some things moved around in your warehouse. Get better at what you're doing. Maybe, you know, always be closing. You know, there's sales never stops. Actually, sales has been new business has been better than it ever has for us. So I think it's important to you know, look at this not only as just a pandemic and bad things that are going on, but I mean, you can improve your process. I think it's important. We always hear about recyclers going out of business because of costs. Manage your costs, employees, everything. It's, you know, it's very important. You need to manage your costs. And one of my mentors told me when the pandemic started, he said, "Hey, remember startup mode? Go back to it." Mm-hmm. And that was probably the best advice he ever gave. He said, "Hey, it's startup mode again. Get back in it." And so me personally, I've been working in the warehouse. I've been actually working in the business a little bit because things have changed. So you'll see me out. Sometimes you'll see me out on the forklift. There was a time back in May when our drivers were not comfortable going on site. I drove the truck to show our employees that I was willing to do. I won't ask you to do anything that I'm not willing to do. So I think it's important to get back to, you know, a startup mentality until this thing is over, or until, you know, we get to some type of normalcy. So and communicate with your employees, with your customers, vendors, all communicate.
And I think that's what we are trying to do here too, as well, is to have some open conversation and dialogue. And I think it is hopefully helping everybody, you know, to understand what individual stakeholders are going through. And it's certainly been really beneficial for me to hear from you all. And I also like the idea, Rod, of you going back behind the truck. You thought those days were behind you, but yeah.
I did. And I'm not that great of a driver.
Rod, I'd like to keep it with you here. Another question from the audience specifically about data security. That's been a big rallying cry, you know, for the processing sector more and more over the last 5 to 10 years, and helping to really show that you as an ITAD company or a material processor can also help your clients on data security. And as the pandemic has unfolded, people working from home, using maybe their own personal PCs, it's sort of maybe for a compliance officer, a little bit of a data security nightmare out there. I'm wondering what your thoughts have been as watching all this, and what advice you've been able to give to your clients, or what other perspective you might have on that?
I think, this is all new. I was just talking to Dennis. He has these GPS tracking units. We were talking about being a little bit more transparent with the client, tracking, pretty much sending a tracker to a client or multiple trackers out to a client. And we're seeing a lot of requests that the clients are wanting their employees to send devices directly to us. And so in order to give them a little peace of mind, the thought is, hey, let's put a tracker in each one of those things. And you can track it. Not only can you track it on the device with a tracking number, but you can also track it. It's attached to the device that you're sending. So that's been one of the things that's kind of, and I've noticed that's kind of eased the minds of our customers. Something else we're seeing. We have customers all across the country, and typically, in most cases, we work with other recyclers that might be in the area, or we might work with a logistics carrier to pack it up. We've had some issues kind of getting some of that together. So we have done quite a bit. I call them really long hauls, and our customers have really liked that. And they're willing to cover the cost of that. In the middle of this, just knowing that their data is protected. I mean, there's no money in the world that can really cover you for a data breach. So,
Tracy, did you have any thoughts about the realities of data security and how they've changed of late?
I'm not sure that we've seen a big change. We've already been doing a lot of things that Rod's already, talked about. And so I don't know that we've seen a huge shift. I mean, we certainly take care of, our customers' data and have for a very long time. And we've got, all the processes in place for that. But as far as short stepping certain process for corporates or our government clients, I don't think we've seen that move yet. We still see that they want to send it back to certain places and then come to us. So I don't think that that's changed. I think that on the consumer residential side, there's maybe a little bit more questioning, but that's at some level, that's not really that new. So far, I'm not sure that we've seen that much change.
Well, we are just about at the end of time here, so I just wanted to take one last chance to thank all four of you who have really offered some great insight. Tracy Phillips of Natural Evolution, Jason Linnell of the National Center for Electronics Recycling, Jessica Miller from Illinois EPA, and Rod McDaniel, S3 Recycling Solutions. Thanks so much, everybody out there. Definitely feel free to get in touch with these folks moving forward. Clearly have a lot of expertise. And with that, I wanted to just thank you all for being with us and joining us, and encourage you to stay with us with eScrap Virtual going on throughout the fall. Again, we had an opening day discussion today, and for those of you that go ahead and register for the full event, you'll have access to 3 more exclusive industry Q&As with different executives talking about some really important issues through October. And then October 28th and 29th, our online trade show, networking, and there will be more conversations like this, talking about commodity prices and other subjects. So please go ahead and join us. As I said, there will be sessions, more voices, more exclusive insight, and this is a look at kind of the portal that we're dialing in now. Our team behind the scenes really working hard to give you the best experience for a virtual trade show, connect with other companies, keep the knowledge and the material moving. And with that, networking opportunities for one-on-one conversations, meet new people, develop your client lists. Again, go ahead and register at escrapconference.com. And we'll see you throughout October and the virtual trade show, October 28th, 29th. We're excited about it, and we'll see where all this leads us. And hopefully we can all remain resilient together. So hope everybody's doing well. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you throughout the rest of eScrap Virtual.